Skyline Airlines Flight 814 had taken off from Denver International Airport just after sunrise, cutting through the cold morning haze. On board were 200 passengers, business travelers clutching briefcases, families with restless children, and vacationers trying to sneak in a last weekend getaway before the workweek began. The plane hummed steadily, its engines a reassuring drone beneath the polished cabin. To most, it was just another ordinary flight, but to Captain Alina Rivera, nothing was ever truly ordinary. Every takeoff, every landing carried the weight of life itself. Alina adjusted her headset and checked the instrument panel for the 100th time. She had flown this route countless times, but she never let familiarity breed complacency. Her eyes, a sharp gray that could cut through the haze of panic if need be, flicked across the dials with practiced precision. Beside her, her co-pilot Mark Lewis was quiet, scrolling through the checklist with a professional detachment that Alina admired. But she could feel his tension in the tightness of his shoulders, the slight tremor in his fingers. In the cabin, a young mother struggled to soothe her toddler, the child's cries piercing through the steady drone of the engines. An elderly couple gripped each other's hands, silently praying for a smooth flight. Life in the air was fragile, and Alina carried that weight silently, like a second heartbeat. She had always felt a strange kinship with the thousands of souls who trusted her to navigate the skis, and today, that bond would be tested in ways she could never have imagined. The first hour passed uneventfully. Passengers settled into their routines, reading, scrolling through their phones, napping in the soft hum of the cabin. Alina sipped her coffee, savoring the quiet, watching the Colorado Rockies fall away beneath them in sharp ridges of snow and stone. But then it happened. A sudden, violent jolt that rattled the plane, sending coffee cups sliding across the tray tables. A piercing screech of metal echoed through the cabin. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling as panic began to spread like wildfire. Alina's heart skipped, but her hand stayed steady on the controls. She forced her voice into calmness, her tone measured even as adrenaline surged through her veins. "Mark, status report." Her co-pilot's face was pale, eyes wide with alarm. "Engine failure, one's gone completely. The second is unstable." His words were clipped, but they carried the weight of doom. Smoke began to curl along the ceiling, and the acrid smell of burning metal filled the cabin. Passengers screamed, clutching their armrests as if sheer force could tether them to the world. Flight attendants moved with practiced efficiency, shouting instructions through the chaos, their voices barely audible over the shrieking metal and cries. Alina felt a hand brush hers, the young mother from row 14, gripping the edge of the cockpit door. "Are we going to make it?" the woman asked, her voice trembling. Alina gave her the faintest nod, more for herself than for the stranger. "We will," she said. "Trust me." Inside, doubt clawed at her mind. Emergency landings were part of her training, but this was different. At 35,000 feet, the plane was a massive beast of steel and technology, and now it was wounded. The closest airstrip was miles away, a tiny speck on her navigational map in Wyoming. To land, there would mean threading a needle through a narrow valley flanked by jagged cliffs and dense forest. One miscalculation could send the plane tearing through rock, taking 200 lives with it. Her hands gripped the yoke harder, her knuckles turned white. Mark swallowed audibly beside her, glancing at the panel. "Alina, do you think we can make it?" His voice betrayed both fear and trust. Alina's gaze shifted to the horizon, to the tiny strip of land barely visible in the morning haze. "We don't have a choice," she replied. Her tone was steel, but her chest tightened. Every second counted. Every decision could mean life or death. Below, the Rocky Mountains stretched like frozen waves, their peaks sharp against the pale morning sky. Alina felt the plane shudder as turbulence whipped around the peaks, throwing her passengers into sudden fear. A young man screamed, and the echo of it bounced through the cabin like a warning bell. The plane groaned, as if aware of its own frailty. She thought of her father, a retired pilot who had always told her, "A plane listens to fear. If you give it fear, it will answer with disaster." She would not give in. She ran a series of mental calculations: altitude, airspeed, wind shear, engine output. Her eyes flicked between dials, horizon, and the narrow clearing below. She could almost feel the valley calling to her, a dangerous cradle waiting to either save or destroy them. Her mind raced with contingencies. Engine out procedure, emergency landing checklists, evacuation protocols. But one thing was certain, there would be no margin for error. In the cabin, the panic was escalating. Children cried, adults shouted, some prayed aloud. Flight attendants tried to maintain order, pulling passengers down into brace positions, yelling instructions over the chaos. Alina could hear the cabin shaking violently with every turbulence bump. She inhaled sharply, pushing the fear away, channeling it into focus. This wasn't just a flight anymore, it was a crucible. And then she noticed it. The valley was closer than she had anticipated. The airstrip, a thin ribbon of concrete surrounded by forest and rocky slopes, seemed impossibly small from her vantage point. The wind currents twisted around the cliffs unpredictably, creating invisible hazards. Every instinct screamed danger, yet she knew hesitation was fatal. She spoke into the intercom, her voice calm, precise, almost soothing. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are experiencing a mechanical issue. Please remain calm and stay in your seats. Follow all instructions from the flight attendants. We are going to land safely." Her words were like a thread through the storm. Passengers' screams quieted slightly. They looked at her, searching for reassurance, for some sign that they would live. And in that instant, Alina realized the true weight of command. The lives of 200 people rested entirely on her. Not the autopilot, not the co-pilot, not the plane itself, but her. Her hands moved with the precision of someone trained to make split-second life-and-death decisions. She maneuvered the crippled plane toward the valley, each adjustment a delicate negotiation with gravity and momentum. Her stomach churned, her pulse a drumbeat in her ears, but she forced herself to remain calm. Every decision mattered. Every second mattered. Then, without warning, a sharp jolt shook the plane violently. A small panel in the cockpit sparked and smoked. Mark cursed under his breath, trying to stabilize the instruments. Alina's jaw tightened. She could almost hear the whispers of history, the ghosts of pilots who had faced impossible odds and failed. But she would not fail. Not today. Not now. As Flight 814 lurched forward, teetering between survival and catastrophe, Alina Rivera fixed her eyes on the valley below. She knew this flight, this moment, would define her. The world beyond the cockpit windows seemed to hold its breath alongside her passengers. Every eye in the cabin, every heartbeat, every scream and whispered prayer, all of it converged into a single, terrifying truth. One wrong move, and it was over. Alina inhaled deeply, letting the cold, thin air fill her lungs. She whispered under her breath, almost to herself, "We can do this. We have to." And as the first jagged rocks of the valley floor loomed below, a sickening mix of fear and determination surged through her. The impossible descent was about to begin. The plane lurched violently as it descended into the jagged valley, a steel beast hurtling toward an uncertain fate. Alina Rivera's knuckles whitened around the yoke as she fought the aircraft, muscles straining, eyes darting between instruments and the narrowing strip of concrete below. Mark Lewis, her co-pilot, gritted his teeth, monitoring the failing engine while attempting to maintain balance. Outside, the wind whipped across the cliffs, creating turbulence that tossed the plane like a toy. Below them, the valley's slopes loomed closer, jagged rocks and dark green forests stretching toward the sky. The airstrip was a sliver, barely noticeable from the cockpit, its edges lined by emergency markers that looked minuscule from 30,000 feet. Alina felt a shiver of recognition. This was not just a landing, it was a knife's edge, a gamble with every life aboard. Inside the cabin, the panic had escalated into chaos. Oxygen masks dangled like strange mechanical birds, some passengers struggling to get them over their faces. Children screamed, their terror mingling with the cries of adults. Flight attendants shouted instructions, trying to maintain calm while their own hearts raced. The overhead compartments rattled ominously, spilling personal belongings into the aisles. Alina's intercom voice cut through the cacophony, calm and precise. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing for an emergency landing. Please remain in your seats and follow the instructions from your flight attendants. I promise we will do everything in our power to get you down safely." Her words offered some reassurance, but she knew that fear could twist even the strongest nerves. A man in the middle of the cabin had started praying aloud, his voice trembling. A mother clutched her infant so tightly that the child cried even harder, sensing her terror. Alina took a deep breath and tried to push her own fear aside. She had trained for emergencies her whole life, but nothing had prepared her for this. An engine out, turbulence, a tiny landing strip, and 200 lives relying on her every decision. Mark broke the silence, his voice tense but controlled. "Alina, the left engine is completely offline. The right is fluctuating. We've lost hydraulics in the left wing." Alina's stomach dropped. She forced herself to stay calm, though panic clawed at her chest. "Okay, we stick to manual control. Focus on glide path, use flaps minimally, and keep her steady. We'll make it. We have to make it." The valley seemed to grow taller with every second, cliffs closing in as if the earth itself wanted to swallow them. She adjusted the throttle, feeling the plane respond sluggishly. Sparks flickered from a panel in the cockpit, and smoke curled toward the ceiling. The vibration through the yoke was constant, a reminder that their fragile steel shell might crumble at any moment. In the cabin, the turbulence threw passengers from side to side. A young man's coffee splashed across the aisle, narrowly missing a woman clutching her child. Flight attendants held their ground like anchors amid the storm, guiding terrified passengers into brace positions. Alina's eyes flicked to the cabin cameras. She could see every fear-stricken face, every tear, every trembling hand. They were all counting on her. Her mind raced through contingencies. She ran the calculations mentally: altitude, airspeed, glide angle, and the wind shear coming off the cliffs. She knew the margin for error was virtually zero. Any miscalculation could send the plane careening into the rocks. Her fingers danced over the yoke, micro-adjusting the plane's descent, her entire being focused on the delicate balance between survival and disaster. "Prepare for landing," she muttered under her breath, almost as a mantra. She felt the first hint of nausea creeping up her throat, the adrenaline mixing with fatigue. Her jaw ached from clenching so tightly. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself to remain methodical, rational. Panic was the enemy now. The valley narrowed. Trees rose like dark sentinels on either side, their branches clawing at the sky. Rocks jutted out at impossible angles, making any error fatal. The emergency landing strip appeared ahead, a sliver of gray against the green and brown. Alina adjusted her approach, calculating the descent angle with meticulous precision. Every fraction of a second counted. Suddenly, turbulence hit harder than before. The plane shuddered violently, throwing Alina against her harness. Instruments flashed warnings in rapid succession. "Brace! Brace!" Mark yelled, gripping his controls with all his strength. Alina's mind flickered to the passengers, every single one. She imagined their lives in those frantic seconds. Parents holding children, business travelers praying, someone who had just received life-changing news waiting for their first chance at freedom. All of them depended on her. She could not fail. Outside, the wind tore through the valley, creating sudden downdrafts. The plane dipped perilously, scraping the tops of trees with a screech that made Alina's stomach lurch. She fought the yoke, countering the descent with every ounce of strength she possessed. Sweat streamed down her forehead, stinging her eyes. She blinked rapidly, forcing focus, refusing to acknowledge the possibility of failure. The emergency strip appeared closer, impossibly narrow and short. Her eyes darted between the instruments and the horizon, measuring distance, altitude, and speed. She engaged the flaps minimally, careful not to destabilize the fragile balance. Her hands were steady, but inside, a storm raged, a mix of fear, adrenaline, and fierce determination. In the cabin, passengers felt the plane begin to stabilize, the turbulence subsiding slightly. Flight attendants continued to guide passengers into brace positions, their voices calm but urgent. Elena's voice again echoed over the intercom. "Stay calm. You are going to be safe. We are almost there." Mark's voice trembled as he monitored the fluctuating engine output. "Elena, the left engine isn't responding. We may have to rely solely on glide." Elena's heart skipped a beat, but she did not hesitate. "We glide. We do this together. Hold her steady." She adjusted the controls, coaxing the plane like a living creature, coaxing life from steel and wings. The plane descended further, the emergency strip looming closer. Every eye in the cabin was glued to the windows, witnessing a miracle in slow motion. Trees whipped past, cliffs rose sharply, rocks glimmered below like jagged teeth. Elena's voice remained calm, a tether for the souls on board. "We are almost there. Brace for impact." Time slowed. The valley seemed to stretch forever. Elena felt the vibrations through the plane's frame, the deafening roar of engines, the strain of metal against gravity. Her mind focused on one thing: landing safely. Nothing else mattered. And then, just as the plane began to touch the strip, a sudden jolt threw passengers forward. The landing gear scraped against rocks at the edge of the runway. Sparks flew, smoke filled the cabin, and the plane shuddered violently. Elena gritted her teeth, holding the yoke with every ounce of strength she had left. The plane skidded along the strip, bouncing and groaning, the trees looming closer. She could hear the terrified screams, the cries of children, the whispered prayers. And then, finally, a moment of eerie stillness. The plane had touched down. Elena's chest heaved, sweat pouring down her face. She exhaled slowly, thinking the worst was over. But deep inside, she sensed it. The valley held more danger than just terrain. Something was coming, something she could not yet see. And as Flight 814 rolled to a precarious stop, Elena knew that this was only the beginning. The valley was a cage, its jagged cliffs rising sharply on either side as Skyline Airlines Flight 814 skidded to a halt on the narrow strip of concrete. Smoke curled from the engines, and the acrid smell of burnt metal filled the cabin. Passengers were frozen in their seats, hearts hammering in unison, gripping armrests or each other. Elena Rivera's eyes flicked to the cockpit instruments. One engine was completely dead, the other was sputtering unpredictably. Hydraulics on the left wing were compromised, and the plane's landing gear had barely survived the initial contact. Mark Lewis's hands were shaking as he monitored the instruments. "Elena, we barely made it," he whispered, his voice tight with disbelief. Elena didn't respond immediately. She was scanning the horizon, the valley, the strip of concrete that had just saved them. The plane groaned as it settled on the tarmac, but something about the valley's shadows made her skin crawl. She could feel it, the subtle vibrations beneath them, the ominous sense that their ordeal was far from over. The passengers were beginning to realize they were alive. Mothers clutched their children, tears streaming down their faces. Some whispered prayers of gratitude while others remained frozen, unable to move, their fear lingering like smoke. Flight attendants moved quickly, instructing passengers to remain in their seats, checking for injuries, all while their own adrenaline-fueled nerves kept them in motion. Elena's focus returned to the plane. The engines were failing, the systems were compromised, and the narrow valley offered no room for error. She couldn't afford to celebrate yet, not when every decision she made now could mean life or death. "Mark," she said, her voice steady, "we need to clear the strip and get airborne again. We can't stay here." Mark swallowed, his eyes wide. "But the engines—" "I know," Elena interrupted, voice firm. "We do this by the book, one step at a time. We glide if we have to, but we get out of this valley." Outside, the wind had picked up, twisting through the cliffs with a violent force. Dust and debris swirled around the plane as Elena manipulated the yoke with precise, almost desperate movements. The fuselage creaked ominously. The plane felt alive beneath her hands, a fragile giant that would not tolerate hesitation. Alina ran through her mental checklist: flaps, throttle, glide path, emergency procedures. Every microsecond mattered. Every adjustment of the yoke could prevent catastrophe or trigger it. She looked down at the passengers, their faces pale and wide-eyed, every pair of eyes fixed on her. She swallowed her fear, forcing it into sharp focus. The first attempt to taxi off the runway proved treacherous. The plane bounced along uneven terrain, scraping rocks at the edges, each jolt reverberating through the cabin like thunder. Passengers screamed, and the cabin rattled as overhead bins popped open, spilling belongings into the aisle. Alina gritted her teeth, refusing to flinch. She was no longer just a pilot, she was a lifeline. Every decision she made would echo in the lives of everyone on board. Mark's voice trembled as he spoke through clenched teeth. "Alina, if we don't get airborne soon, the valley walls will trap us." Alina's pulse spiked. She knew he was right. The valley was narrow, the cliffs rising sharply on both sides. If the plane stalled, if the engine sputtered completely, they would be crushed. Her mind raced for options, for calculations, for contingencies she had memorized but never tested under real life-or-death conditions. There was only one choice: glide, maneuver, and hope the right wing held. She adjusted the throttle, coaxing the remaining engine to give every ounce of thrust it could muster. The plane lurched forward, scraping the edge of the runway. Sparks flew as metal kissed stone. Alina's teeth clenched, jaw tight with determination. The valley seemed to close in with each second, cliffs leaning like predators waiting to strike. Inside, the passengers were gripping their seats with white-knuckled terror. A woman in row 18 gasped aloud as the plane tilted slightly to one side. A father whispered soothing words to his son, voice trembling despite the calm he tried to project. Alina could feel the collective fear pressing against her like a physical weight, and she drew on it, not as a burden, but as fuel. "Brace positions," she instructed calmly over the intercom, voice cutting through the chaos. "Keep your heads down, hold on tight. We're going to get through this." The plane rose slightly, scraping the valley floor with a deafening screech. Sparks flew from the landing gear, and Alina felt a stomach-churning lurch. She fought to stabilize the aircraft, fingers aching from the strain on the yoke. Her vision narrowed to the strip of concrete ahead and the walls of the valley pressing in from either side. Every second stretched, elastic and terrifying. Then a new danger appeared. A sudden gust of wind tore through the valley, buffeting the plane violently. Trees whipped past the windows at impossible angles. Rocks tumbled from cliffs, bouncing and cracking below them. Alina's mind worked in overdrive, calculating every micro-adjustment, shifting flaps, manipulating the throttle, coaxing the plane as if it were a living creature. Mark's voice was tense but clear. "Alina, the left wing isn't responding properly. We may have to abort the ascent and glide through the trees." Alina's heart leapt into her throat. Gliding through a forest at 100 knots with a crippled plane was madness, but the valley left no other option. She swallowed hard, exhaling slowly, forcing her hands steady on the controls. "We glide," she said firmly. "Trust me, follow my lead." The plane tilted dangerously, scraping tree branches as they descended. Metal groaned under pressure. Sparks and small fragments of the fuselage fell away like embers from a fire. Alina's focus was razor-sharp, every movement deliberate. She could feel the plane shudder beneath her hands, a living, breathing entity fighting for survival. The passengers screamed, some silently, some openly. A young woman clutched her armrest, teeth gritted, eyes wide with disbelief. A child sobbed into a mother's chest, the sound echoing through the cabin. Flight attendants moved with uncanny calm, guiding passengers through brace positions, checking seat belts, reassuring anyone who looked at them. As they descended further, the valley walls loomed impossibly close. Alina calculated the glide path with every instinct honed from years of flight training. She whispered to herself, "Just a little further, just a little further." The plane scraped over rocks and tree branches, every touch of the fuselage sending a jolt through the cabin. Sparks flew like fireflies against the dark green backdrop of the forest. Alina's teeth clenched as she fought for control, sweat streaming down her face. She could hear every metal groan, every engine sputter, every passenger's gasp, all merging into a symphony of terror and hope. Then finally, a brief clearing appeared, barely wide enough to allow the plane through. Alina adjusted the yoke, coaxing the fuselage through the narrow gap. The valley seemed to hold its breath alongside them. Outside, sunlight glinted off jagged cliffs, illuminating the danger that surrounded them. Inside, passengers stared wide-eyed, gripping seats, clutching loved ones, praying silently. The plane cleared the trees, and for a fleeting moment a glimmer of hope flickered. Alina allowed herself a fraction of a breath, but the valley was not done with them. A sudden downdraft pitched the plane violently, shaking it from side to side. Mark shouted warnings, but Alina's hands were steady, her focus absolute. "Hold her steady," she commanded. "We're almost out." The plane's fuselage groaned, metal scraping, engines coughing. Sparks rained from the left wing. Alina gritted her teeth, sweat blinding her eyes, muscles trembling. Every fiber of her being was focused on one goal: survival. One wrong movement, one miscalculation, and they would be crushed, splintered, lost. Time seemed to stretch into eternity. The plane wavered, tilted, and then, by a fraction of an inch, a miracle of control and precision, it leveled. They were free of the valley's immediate grasp, airborne above the treetops. A collective exhale seemed to echo through the cabin, a fragile pause between terror and relief. But Alina's instincts screamed that the danger was far from over. She felt it in the trembling of the aircraft, in the eerie silence that followed the storm. Something else was out there, something watching. And in the distance, through the thinning morning haze, two sharp silhouettes appeared on the horizon, their engines screaming in a way that made Alina's blood run cold. F-22 jets, cutting across the sky like predators. Alina's pulse spiked. The valley had released them, but now the sky itself held a new threat, one she didn't yet understand. And as the sleek jets approached, a voice crackled over the radio, calm but commanding. "Unidentified civilian craft, call sign Phoenix. Report your status immediately." Alina froze. Phoenix. How did they know her call sign? And why was it being broadcast across this remote valley to these jets at this exact moment? Her heart pounded, adrenaline surged, and the valley below seemed a distant nightmare. Something had shifted. The impossible descent had been survived, but the real test, the one that would define everything, was just beginning. Alina's hands froze over the yoke, her pulse hammering in her temples as the voice from the F-22 radio echoed again. "Call sign Phoenix. Identify yourself immediately. Report your status." The word Phoenix reverberated in her mind. It wasn't a call sign she had ever publicly used. Only a handful of people in her life knew that name. How could they possibly know it? She swallowed hard, glancing at Mark, who looked equally stunned, his knuckles gripping the console. "Alina, they know you," he whispered. She forced herself to remain calm, her voice steady even as the adrenaline surged through her veins. "Yes, but we have bigger problems right now. Engine failure, compromised hydraulics, and we're still in this valley. Let's focus on getting out first." The jets cut through the sky with precision, their sleek fuselages glinting in the sun like predators circling wounded prey. One broke formation, flying low alongside Flight 814. Its pilot's voice came through again, calmer now but firm. "Phoenix, your aircraft is heavily compromised. You are not alone. Follow my guidance." Alina's breath caught. Not alone. Her mind raced. Who were these pilots? How had they appeared so quickly in this remote valley? And why had they chosen this moment to intervene? She couldn't dwell on questions, not when her passengers' lives hung in the balance. She adjusted the yoke, coaxing the plane forward with the remnants of the failing engine. Sparks flickered from the left wing, the metal groaning as if protesting every movement. The valley's cliffs loomed closer, and the narrow emergency strip they had just passed now seemed like a distant memory. Trees whipped past the windows, their branches clawing at the fuselage, threatening to tear it apart. "Mark, we glide," Alina said, voice taut with focus. "We follow the lead jet, keep her steady." Mark nodded, swallowing hard. His hands moved with meticulous precision, adjusting throttles, flaps, and stabilizers in response to Alina's commands. The plane lurched as turbulence ripped through the valley, but slowly, agonizingly, they began to follow the jet's guidance, moving toward a path barely wide enough to survive. Inside the cabin, the terror hadn't abated. Children cried into their parents' arms, some passengers vomited from the sudden swerves, and the air smelled of smoke, fear, and adrenaline. Alina could see their faces through the small cockpit cameras, pale, wide-eyed, trusting her entirely. She felt a deep, almost primal responsibility. She was the anchor, the one constant keeping them alive. Her mind flashed to the what-ifs. What if the remaining engine failed completely? What if the fuselage buckled on a sharp turn? What if turbulence sent them crashing into the cliffs? She pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on calculations, on physics, on instinct. Each micro-adjustment of the yoke was a negotiation with death itself. "Phoenix, you're approaching a restricted area," the jet pilot said calmly. "Unknown ground elements detected. Stay on my path and do not deviate." Alina's stomach twisted. Restricted area. She followed the lead jet, matching its movements, feeling the aircraft respond sluggishly but obediently. Sparks flickered from the wing, smoke puffed from the fuselage, and her heartbeat threatened to drown out everything else. The valley widened slightly, giving her room to maneuver, but the ground below was a labyrinth of rocks, jagged cliffs, and dense forest. Any miscalculation could mean instant destruction. She adjusted the throttle, letting the glimmer of lift carry the plane forward while following the jet's precise path. Suddenly, the plane lurched violently to the side. A downdraft had caught them, twisting the fuselage dangerously. Passengers screamed, their voices mingling with the screech of metal and the roar of wind. Alina's fingers gripped the yoke until her knuckles cracked, muscles trembling. "Hold her steady," she shouted over the roar, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Don't let her tip." Mark responded with precision, manipulating flaps and stabilizers as Alina directed. The plane twisted, bucked, and then, miraculously, stabilized. Sparks flew from a damaged panel and smoke filled the cockpit, but they were still airborne. "Alina, the left engine is down," Mark warned. "We may not make it if we have to climb." Alina swallowed, sweat stinging her eyes. She focused on gliding, following the jet's lead. "We'll glide. We do not stall. We trust the path." The jet dipped lower, signaling a narrow pass through the valley's jagged terrain. Alina adjusted the yoke, tilting the plane, holding it at a precarious angle as the cliffs rushed past. Trees snapped branches against the fuselage and debris ricocheted inside the cabin. A suitcase tumbled across the aisle, knocking into a passenger who shrieked. Alina's stomach clenched, but she held her focus. 1 second of hesitation could be catastrophic. "Brace positions," she called again over the intercom. Her voice was calm but urgent, slicing through the chaos like a blade. "Hold tight, stay in your seats, follow the instructions of your flight attendants." The plane banked sharply, skimming the cliffside, sparks cascading like fireworks. Alina felt the fuselage shudder violently as metal groaned under stress. She could hear the whine of the remaining engine, a desperate cry, fighting to keep them alive. Mark's voice trembled as he adjusted the throttles. "Alina, if we don't gain altitude soon, the valley walls will crush us." Alina's jaw clenched. Her eyes scanned the terrain, looking for any advantage, any lift, any path that would allow them to survive. Then she spotted it, a small ridge ahead, its slope steep but navigable. If she could angle the plane perfectly, the remaining lift might carry them above the cliffs. She whispered to herself, "Just a little more, hold on." The plane lurched as turbulence ripped through the valley, wind tearing across the wings. Sparks rained from the left panel, smoke curling toward the cockpit. Alina gritted her teeth, forcing every ounce of skill into the yoke, coaxing the plane as if it were a living creature. The lead jet dipped lower, signaling her path, and she followed with precision, hearts pounding in synchrony with the passengers. Time slowed. The valley seemed infinite, the walls closing in, the cliffs reaching skyward like jagged teeth. One wrong angle, one misjudged speed, and the plane would be destroyed. Alina's world narrowed to the instruments, the fuselage, the horizon, and the path of the jet. Everything else disappeared. The ridge approached, and Alina angled the plane, lifting the nose just enough to catch the thin layer of rising air. The fuselage groaned as it tilted, passengers gripping their seats, some screaming, some praying silently. Sparks and smoke filled the cockpit, but the plane responded, barely. Her heart hammered in her chest. They were clearing the ridge barely, the cliffs flashing past, the trees a blur below. The valley had almost claimed them, but the impossible descent had been survived. For a fleeting moment, relief washed over Alina, but she didn't allow herself to celebrate. The F-22 was still there, circling, observing, guiding. And that single word, Phoenix, echoed in her mind, a reminder that someone out there knew more than they should. She looked at Mark, his face pale, eyes wide. "Alina, we did it," he whispered. Alina exhaled slowly, though her grip on the yoke never loosened. "Not yet," she said quietly. "Something coming, I can feel it." Above the valley, the lead F-22 dipped low, wings cutting through the clouds. Its voice came again over the calm, commanding and chilling. "Phoenix, this is not an accident. Engines were sabotaged. Prepare for further instructions." Alina's stomach dropped. Sabotage? Who would target a civilian flight? Why? And how had they known it would be her plane, her passengers? The valley was behind them, but now a far greater danger awaited, one she couldn't yet see. The impossible descent had been survived. But the real storm, the one that would define the rest of her life, and the lives of 200 passengers, was just beginning. Alina Rivera's hands were trembling as she steadied the plane. Sparks still danced from the compromised left wing, smoke curled from the failing engines, and the valley they had fought so desperately to escape now lay far below, a jagged testament to their narrow survival. But the words over the radio, the accusation that her engines had been sabotaged, clung to her mind like a shadow. Sabotage. Someone had deliberately targeted Flight 814. Her pulse quickened, not just from fear for the passengers, but from the anger and disbelief that surged alongside it. She stole a glance at Mark Lewis, who was staring at the console, white-knuckled and silent. His voice trembled when he finally spoke. "Alina, sabotage, but who? Why, how could anyone?" "Alina, focus," she interrupted, her voice low but sharp. "Right now we survive, then we figure out who's behind this. Keep an eye on the instruments, we follow the jet's path, that's our lifeline." Outside, the F-22s cut through the sky like steel arrows, circling with precision and intensity. One stayed alongside them, wings slicing through clouds, its canopy reflecting sunlight in blinding flashes. The voice came again over the radio, calm, methodical, but chilling in its precision. "Phoenix, the sabotage was coordinated. Engines were compromised pre-flight. You are not alone. Follow instructions precisely. Deviations will result in catastrophic failure." Alina's stomach turned. Pre-flight. That meant someone had infiltrated the airline, the maintenance crew, or worse, someone had studied her personally. Her mind raced, searching for possibilities, for any clue, but there was no time for speculation. "Mark," she said, her voice steady, "we follow them. No sudden moves. This jet is guiding us. Don't even think about turning. We can survive this only if we listen. Understand?" Mark swallowed hard, nodding. The remaining engine struggled, but it held enough thrust to follow the jet's lead. Alina adjusted the yoke, keeping the plane steady while carefully calculating every minor correction. Sparks continued to rain from the left wing as the fuselage groaned under strain. Every movement had to be precise. Every hesitation could mean death. Inside the cabin, the tension had shifted. Fear remained, but there was a flicker of cautious hope. Passengers watched the horizon, seeing the sleek jets circling, unaware of the secrets those pilots carried. Alina knew she could not let them see her fear, not yet. She forced herself to breathe, to focus, to remain the anchor of calm amid chaos. Then, without warning, the jet shifted slightly, signaling a turn toward a distant ridge. Alina followed, the plane responding sluggishly but obediently. Sparks flared from the left engine panel as the aircraft tilted violently. Trees loomed closer, cliffs flashed past, and every second stretched into an eternity. "Alina, we can't climb much higher," Mark warned, sweat streaking his face. "The engine's the left wing." "I know," Alina snapped, teeth clenched. "We glide, we stay steady. One wrong move and it's over. Follow my lead, trust me." The jet dipped lower, guiding them toward a narrow canyon that seemed impossibly thin. Alina's stomach lurched as the fuselage scraped dangerously close to the cliff face. Sparks flew from contact, and the metal groaned under stress. Inside the cabin, passengers screamed, bracing themselves against the armrests. Flight attendants moved swiftly, guiding people into proper brace positions, their own fear hidden beneath a mask of professionalism. As they entered the canyon, Alina felt the plane shudder violently. She instinctively adjusted the yoke, coaxing the aircraft through the narrow pass. The remaining engine whined, its sputtering sound like a desperate cry for survival. Sparks erupted from a compromised hydraulic line, smoke filling the cockpit. "Hold her steady," Alina shouted, voice cutting through the roar of wind and engine. "Do not let her tip, do not let her stall." Mark's hands moved with precision, adjusting flaps, monitoring thrust, countering the plane's tendency to tilt. The fuselage shuddered again, scraping cliff sides, sending metal fragments clattering inside the cabin. Alina's vision narrowed to the instruments and the narrow gap of sky ahead. She felt the plane's heartbeat beneath her hands, alive and fragile, and she poured every ounce of skill, willpower, and instinct into keeping it in the air. Suddenly, the voice from the F-22 returned, calm but urgent. "Phoenix, the sabotage was coordinated by an external contractor with knowledge of your schedule. The aircraft's left engine and hydraulics were tampered with after maintenance checks. You must follow the canyon path precisely. Any deviation will trigger complete engine failure." Alina's jaw tightened. Someone had studied her habits, and engineered near-certain death. Her mind raced, anger boiling beneath her calm exterior. Who would do this, and why target us? Her attention snapped back to survival. The canyon narrowed further, cliffs rising like jagged walls. Rocks tumbled from above, bouncing into the narrow path they were forced to follow. Sparks flew from contact with cliff edges, metal screeching under strain. Alina adjusted the yoke, coaxing the plane forward with meticulous precision, guided by the jet. Inside the cabin, fear had turned into panic. Children screamed, mothers clutched their bobbies, and the older passengers held tight, praying. The plane lurched violently as it brushed against the canyon walls, sending a cascade of noise through the cabin. Alina's teeth clenched, sweat streaming down her face. She could not let the fear take over. Not now, not ever. Mark's voice trembled but was precise. "Alina, the canyon is too narrow. We may not fit. The fuselage." "Then we glide," Alina said firmly. "We glide, we trust the path, and we survive. Follow me. Focus on the path ahead, nothing else matters." The plane tilted dangerously, scraping rocks and sending sparks flying. Every second felt like an hour. Time had become a cruel observer, stretching the impossible into agony. Alina's focus narrowed to a single point, the opening at the end of the canyon, a faint strip of sky promising survival. Then, as they approached the opening, a sudden gust of wind hit the fuselage, tilting the plane sharply. Sparks erupted from the damaged engine, smoke filling the cockpit. Alina's hands gripped the yoke with white-knuckled force. "Brace positions," she shouted over the intercom, voice slicing through fear. "Hold tight, stay in your seats, flight attendants secure everyone." The plane lurched, scraping dangerously close to the canyon walls. Metal groaned, passengers screamed, and the remaining engine cried in desperation. Alina adjusted the yoke, forcing the aircraft into a glide path that seemed impossibly narrow, impossible even to imagine. But somehow, miraculously, it worked. The canyon ended abruptly, opening into a clearing. The valley stretched below, sunlight glinting off cliffs, trees, and distant lakes. Alina exhaled sharply, though her grip on the yoke never loosened. Sparks and smoke still filled the cockpit, but they were alive. For now they had survived the sabotage, the impossible descent, and the canyon's deadly grip. The F-22 pilot's voice returned, calm but firm. "Phoenix, you have survived the canyon. Engines are unstable. Further instructions will follow. Prepare for controlled landing." Alina's heart hammered. Survival had been hard-won, but the revelation of sabotage made it clear. This was only the beginning. Someone had deliberately tried to kill them, and now the real danger was waiting, unseen, in the shadows. As Flight 814 glided over the valley, smoke trailing from the left engine, Alina glanced at Mark. Their eyes met, silent acknowledgement passing between them. They had survived against impossible odds, but the storm was far from over. And above them, the F-22s circled, guardians or perhaps watchers, hinting at secrets Alina had yet to uncover. The impossible descent had been conquered, but the fight for 200 lives and the answers behind the sabotage was just beginning. The valley below spread wide, sunlight glinting off jagged cliffs and dark green forests. Flight 814's damaged fuselage groaned under the stress of the failing left engine, but the plane glided steadily, coaxed by Alina's unwavering hands and Mark's precise coordination. Sparks trailed from the compromised wing like fireflies, and smoke curled from the panel above the cockpit. Every moment felt like walking a knife's edge. "Phoenix, prepare for controlled landing," the F-22 pilot's voice said again, crisp, professional, and chilling. "Clear area identified 3 kilometers ahead. Glide path calculated. Follow instructions precisely. Deviation will be fatal." Alina's pulse spiked. She had survived the impossible canyon, the sabotage, and the near-death glide, but the final challenge awaited, landing on a strip barely wider than the plane itself, in an unknown location, with 200 lives at stake. Mark adjusted the throttles, eyes glued to the instruments. "We can do this, just follow your lead." Alina nodded silently, jaw tight. She could feel the weight of every passenger, every life, every hope resting on her shoulders. Her fingers danced over the yoke, coaxing the plane along the glide path. Sparks flared as the left wing flexed under strain, metal protesting every adjustment. Inside the cabin, tension was palpable. Flight attendants guided passengers into brace positions, whispering calm instructions as fear etched every face. Children clung to their parents, some sobbing, some silent with terror. Alina's voice cut through the chaos over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing for a controlled emergency landing. Follow your flight attendant's instructions. Hold on tight. You are in capable hands." A moment of silence followed, tense, fragile, hanging like a single note in a symphony. Every passenger held their breath. Every second stretched to eternity. Outside, the emergency strip came into view, carved into a plateau, flanked by steep cliffs and surrounded by dense forest. It looked impossibly small, yet it was their only chance. Alina adjusted the yoke, calculating descent, throttle, and glide angle with razor-sharp precision. Sparks flew from the left wing again as it scraped dangerously close to a rock outcrop. Mark's voice broke through the cockpit's tension. "Alina, we're losing altitude faster than expected. The left engine is dead, total failure. We have to land now." Alina's eyes narrowed, focus absolute. "I know, we glide, no hesitation. Every microsecond counts." The plane shuddered violently as it descended toward the narrow strip. Trees whipped past the windows, the fuselage scraping branches, sparks flying from contact. The valley below seemed to shrink, the strip growing closer by fractions of a second. She adjusted flaps, manipulated throttles, every movement a negotiation with death. Inside the cabin, panic threatened to break loose. Passengers gripped armrests, whispered prayers, some closed their eyes in terror. Alina could feel their fear pressing against her like a physical weight. She drew on it, using it as fuel, as focus, as determination. The plane touched down, the wheels skimming over the strip with a screech of friction. Sparks erupted from the compromised landing gear. The fuselage groaned under the stress. Alina kept her hands steady, coaxing the plane forward along the narrow strip, guiding it like a lifeline across a canyon of steel and stone. "Keep her straight," she shouted over the roar, voice sharp and commanding. "Steady, steady." The plane skidded, scraping edges of the strip. The left wing hit a jagged outcrop, sending a spray of sparks into the air. Passengers screamed, gripping each other, holding tight. Alina and Mark fought for control, muscles trembling from strain, faces slick with sweat. And then a miracle. The plane cleared the strip, slowing to a crawl, smoke trailing from damaged panels, the left wing flexing under pressure. They had landed. A collective gasp and relieved cries filled the cabin. Some passengers wept openly, others clutched their loved ones, silent tears streaming down faces etched with terror and gratitude. Flight attendants moved quickly, guiding everyone to remain seated, checking for injuries, their own adrenaline-fueled energy keeping them moving. Alina exhaled slowly, but her eyes remained sharp. The F-22 hovered nearby, engines slicing the air, wings reflecting sunlight. A voice came over the radio, calm but urgent. "Phoenix, landing successful. Prepare for ground extraction. Sabotage was coordinated. We are initiating containment protocol. Remain in your aircraft until instructed." Alina's pulse quickened. Ground extraction, containment protocol. She glanced at Mark, who was staring wide-eyed at the valley below. "Mark, they know more than we do," she said quietly. "We follow instructions, no sudden moves." As passengers began to settle, a subtle vibration ran through the plateau beneath them. Alina's eyes widened. The emergency strip was stable, but movement from the surrounding terrain indicated someone, or something, was approaching. Through the thick forest, shadows moved swiftly, coordinated, precise. Alina's mind raced. Were these operatives connected to the sabotage? Military? Mercenaries? She had no way of knowing, but instinct screamed danger. "Passengers, remain calm," she said over the intercom. "Do not leave your seats. Flight attendants, secure everyone. Emergency response teams are arriving." The first figures emerged from the tree line. Black tactical gear, rifles slung across their chests, movements practiced, deliberate. Alina's heart raced as the F-22 hovered above, seemingly coordinating with them. They approached Flight 814 cautiously but quickly, a silent warning. One wrong move and chaos would erupt. Mark whispered under his breath, voice trembling, "They're here for us or for the sabotage." Alina didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were fixed on the approaching figures, calculating, anticipating. Every muscle was taut, every nerve alive. They had survived the impossible canyon, the sabotage, and the near-death glide, but the ground, once thought safe, now threatened to become a battleground. The F-22 pilot's voice returned, calm, cutting through tension like a blade. "Phoenix, extraction in progress. Keep passengers calm. Operatives will board shortly. Any deviation from protocol will result in termination of extraction. Trust the process." Alina's hands loosened slightly on the yoke, but her eyes never left the operatives. One by one, they reached the plane, moving in synchrony, their precision both terrifying and awe-inspiring. The first operative approached the cockpit window, signaling them to open the door. "Alina, it's time," Mark said softly. She nodded, her jaw tight. Passengers remain calm. Flight attendants prepare to disembark under guidance. We are not out of danger yet. Stay focused, stay seated. The operative tapped lightly on the cockpit glass, signaling them to open the door. Alina's hands were steady, but her mind raced. Whoever these people were, they had answers, and probably more questions, dangers, and threats than she could imagine. As the cockpit door opened, the valley wind swept through, carrying the scent of pine, smoke, and tension. Alina's gaze met the operative's eyes, steel and intensity reflected back. "Phoenix," the operative said, voice calm but commanding, "we need to move. There's no time to waste. Your aircraft was targeted, and the threat is far from neutralized." Alina nodded, swallowing hard. "Lead the way. Mark, stay close. Passengers brace for evacuation." The ground had never felt so dangerous. They had survived fire, metal, and gravity. But now, the real danger, the human danger, the shadowed intent behind the sabotage, was waiting for them just beyond the plane's door. And as the last passengers prepared to disembark under the operative's guidance, Alina knew one thing: surviving Flight 814 was only the beginning. The storm had followed them to the ground, and the fight for answers and survival was far from over. Alina Rivera stepped out of the cockpit, the valley air hitting her like a whip. The plateau was deceptively calm after the chaos of Flight 814's crash landing, but the presence of the operatives reminded her that danger had only shifted, not disappeared. Their black tactical uniforms, rifles slung with precision, and calculated movements sent a clear message. Nothing here was accidental. The operative who had approached the cockpit gestured sharply. "Phoenix, follow me. The passengers are secured. You need to see the command center now." Alina hesitated for just a fraction of a second before following. Mark flanked her, every sense alert. Behind them, the passengers were herded efficiently, flight attendants guiding them with calm authority, masks of professionalism hiding sheer exhaustion and terror. Alina's heart ached for them. 200 lives had already been pushed to the brink, and they weren't done yet. The operatives led them through a narrow passage between the cliffs, revealing a hidden hangar carved into the rock, its massive doors sliding open with a hiss. Inside, a fleet of sleek vehicles, communication equipment, and monitors reflected the glow of overhead lights. It was a hidden command hub, military grade, and far beyond anything a civilian could have imagined. Who is behind this?" Alina asked, voice tight but controlled as she scanned the room. Her eyes locked on a figure standing near the center, a man in a tailored suit, calm, composed, and radiating authority. His gaze fell on her instantly. "Phoenix," he said, voice smooth, almost too smooth, "I've been expecting you." Her stomach knotted. Recognition flared in her mind. She had seen this man before, on newsreels, at conferences, always behind the curtain, always invisible. He was not a public figure, not in the usual sense. He was a ghost, someone who moved entire operations from the shadows, and now he was here in front of her. "You're behind this," she said, teeth clenched. "You sabotaged my flight. 200 lives, my friends, strangers, families, you tried to kill them. Why?" The man smiled faintly, almost apologetically. "I prefer to think of it as a necessary test. You've always been exceptional, Alina. The way you handled Flight 814, it confirmed what I suspected. You're the only one capable of what's coming next." Alina's hands trembled, anger and disbelief warring with the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "Test? You call this a test? People could have died." "And they almost did," he replied evenly, walking slowly toward her. "But you saved them. That is precisely why you are here. You have a gift, Phoenix, and gifts of your caliber cannot be ignored. The sabotage of the canyon, the landing, it was all designed to prove something, to see if you could survive under pressure. And you did. Brilliantly." Her eyes narrowed. "Brilliantly, you tried to kill us, and now you want what? To recruit me, use me." He paused, hands behind his back. "Call it what you will. The world is changing, Phoenix. Threats are evolving at a speed most cannot comprehend. We need people like you, decisive, fearless, and extraordinarily skilled. People who can operate beyond conventional limits. You passed the test, and now I offer you a choice. Alina felt a chill run down her spine. The calmness of the room, the precision of the operatives, and the calculated menace of the man combined to form a cage around her. Her mind raced. She could see the paths clearly now: compliance, resistance, or escape. All carried risks, and none guaranteed safety for the passengers she had just saved. "What choice?" she asked cautiously, trying to buy time. Her eyes flicked toward Mark, whose expression mirrored her unease. "Join us," he said, voice steady, "or your actions today will be just another report on a failed test." Alina's jaw clenched. She felt every fiber of her being bristle. "You can't just threaten lives to recruit people. That's insane." "And yet," he said softly, "here we are. You survived, didn't you? Twice, against impossible odds. You're extraordinary, Phoenix, and the world will need extraordinary people like you." The operative beside her shifted, rifle glinting under the harsh lights. Alina's mind raced. If she refused, the operatives had full control over the passengers below. She could not let them be harmed, not after everything. But compliance meant aligning with a man whose morality was twisted, whose reach was global, and whose methods were lethal. Mark whispered, voice barely audible, "We have to think. There has to be another way." Alina nodded subtly, formulating a plan even as the mastermind spoke. Her mind ran through escape routes, contingencies, and options. She couldn't just survive. She had to protect the passengers herself and uncover the truth. The man stepped closer, his gaze piercing. "Time is short. Decisions must be made. Will you join us, Phoenix, or refuse and watch the consequences unfold?" Alina inhaled sharply, heart hammering. Every instinct screamed survival, strategy, and control. And in that moment she realized the truth. She could not allow herself to be cornered. She had survived fire, metal, sabotage, and near death. She could survive this too. "I don't negotiate with terrorists," she said firmly. "I saved 200 lives today. I'm not giving you control over them or me." The man's smile didn't falter, but his eyes darkened slightly. "Very well. Then we test you one final time." Suddenly, the monitors around the command hub lit up with real-time feeds: airports, runways, civilian planes. Alina's stomach dropped as she realized the scope. His reach was vast. Flight 814 was only the beginning. The operatives moved swiftly, surrounding her and Mark. Alina's gaze flicked around, calculating. Sparks of strategy, desperation, and courage flared. She was outnumbered, cornered, and still alive. And she would fight, not just for survival, but for the 200 passengers, for justice, and for her own life. "Mark," she whispered, voice taut, "follow my lead. We move fast, we take control, or we lose everything." The mastermind's voice came from behind, calm but deadly. "Phoenix, prove your worth one final time, or fail, and the world will see what happens when extraordinary people resist." Alina's eyes met his, unwavering. Her mind was a whirlwind of calculations, her heart pounding with resolve. They had come for her, for Flight 814, for her skill. But she had survived everything thrown at her so far, and she was not about to stop now. Outside, the hum of F-22s could still be heard, a reminder that not all allies were visible. Inside, every second became a heartbeat, every movement a choice between life and death. The final confrontation had begun, and the mastermind's test was about to escalate to a level that would determine not just their survival, but the fate of countless lives beyond the valley. Alina clenched her fists, taking a deep breath. She would not bow, she would not fail. And the name Phoenix was no longer just a call sign, it was a promise. The room held its breath. The operatives readied themselves. The mastermind smiled faintly, eyes glittering with anticipation. And then, with a sudden, precise motion, Alina made her move. Elena Rivera's pulse pounded like a war drum as she moved. Every instinct screamed danger, every muscle tensed. The mastermind's operatives flanked her and Mark, rifles trained, eyes sharp. But Elena's mind was racing faster than the bullets could fly. She had survived sabotage, a canyon descent, a crash landing, and now she was staring down a man who orchestrated near-certain death as a test. "Mark," she whispered, eyes flicking to the control panels and emergency exits around the hangar. "Trust me, we move on my count. We take control. No hesitation." Mark nodded, white-knuckled but resolute. He had followed her through impossible odds before, and he would again. The mastermind's calm voice echoed across the hangar. "Phoenix, I admire your courage, but courage alone will not save you. Decisions will define the outcome. Choose wisely." Elena didn't respond. Every second wasted was another opportunity for him to gain the upper hand. She edged toward the nearest console, pretending to comply, her mind calculating the exact moment to act. "Now," she whispered. With lightning precision, Elena lunged for the console, flipping a series of switches that cut the hangar lights to red emergency mode. Sparks erupted from the panels, alarms blaring. The operatives' coordination faltered as disorientation hit. Elena seized the moment, kicking a nearby weapon out of an operative's hands and pulling Mark toward the nearest emergency exit. Gunfire erupted as the operatives regained their composure, but Elena's strategy was flawless. She used the hangar's maze-like interior to her advantage, diving behind machinery, using shadows and smoke for cover. Every move was deliberate, every breath calculated. She was no longer just a pilot, she was a force honed by life-or-death experience. Through the chaos, she reached the communications panel. Fingers flying over buttons, she accessed satellite uplinks, broadcasting a distress signal directly to the nearest military command. The F-22s circling overhead received the call instantly. One of the jets swooped lower, a silver streak against the red-tinged hangar lights, and Elena felt a spark of hope ignite. The mastermind's voice cut through the chaos again, calm but tinged with annoyance. "Phoenix, clever, but you underestimate the depth of my planning." Elena's eyes narrowed. "Depth doesn't mean invincibility, and you never accounted for this," she said, nodding subtly to the F-22 overhead. Suddenly, the hangar doors burst open from the outside. The F-22s deployed tactical extraction units, elite operatives trained for high-risk recoveries. The mastermind's men found themselves pinned between Elena's sudden counterattack and the incoming reinforcements. Confusion rippled through their ranks as precise, coordinated strikes neutralized the immediate threat. Elena and Mark moved with agility, guiding the passengers from the hangar to the edge of the plateau. Fear and adrenaline mingled on every face, but Elena's calm command reassured them. They were being led by someone who had survived the impossible and would not fail now. "Stay close," she shouted. "Move fast, don't look back." The mastermind watched from the command hub, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Impressive," he murmured, "truly impressive, but one last lesson remains." Before Elena could react, he pressed a series of buttons on a remote console. Explosions rocked the hangar's periphery, sending debris and fire surging toward the plateau. Smoke choked the air, and the ground shook beneath their feet. Elena's heart leapt. This was a final gambit, a desperate attempt to regain control. "Everyone run," she yelled, adrenaline fueling every step. She grabbed Mark and the nearest passengers, sprinting toward a cluster of armored vehicles waiting near the cliff's edge. The fire and debris pursued, but Elena's instincts were unmatched. She timed her movements perfectly, ducking under falling beams, leaping over jagged rocks, and guiding others with commanding authority. The first vehicle door slammed shut behind them, the engine roaring as it accelerated across the plateau. Elena glanced at the hangar, smoke, fire, chaos, and felt a pang of both satisfaction and sorrow. The mastermind's reach had been vast, but she had survived just as she always had. Inside the armored vehicle, she took a deep breath, finally allowing herself a moment of relief. Mark's hand found hers, a silent acknowledgement of shared survival. Around them, passengers were shaken but alive, their gratitude palpable even amidst fear. "Is it over?" one woman asked, voice trembling. Alina shook her head. "Not entirely," she said. "We've survived today, but this man, he's powerful, he's dangerous, but we know his methods now, and we know how to stop him." Mark squeezed her hand. "Then we finish this together." Outside, the plateau stretched endlessly, sun breaking through the smoke. The F-22s circled above, guardians in the sky, a reminder that they were not alone in this fight. Alina's eyes hardened. She had survived fire, sabotage, a near-fatal canyon glide, and a meticulously planned ambush. Now she would rise. The mastermind's voice echoed in her mind, his words a challenge. "Prove your worth one final time." Alina smiled faintly. "I already have," she whispered, "and now it's my turn." The armored vehicle roared across the plateau, the passengers safe for the moment. But Alina's mind was already calculating the next moves: intelligence leaks, coordinated strikes, and gathering allies. The mastermind's empire was vast, but so was her resolve. For 200 souls, for justice, for herself, and for the name she carried, Phoenix, Alina knew this fight was far from over. But one thing was certain: she had survived everything the world had thrown at her, and she would not bow. High above, the F-22s glinted in the sunlight, a silent vow of protection. Below, the valley stretched, scarred but conquered. And in that moment, Alina Rivera, Phoenix, felt a surge of power and determination unlike anything she had ever known. She had risen from fire, from chaos, from the brink of death. And now nothing, not even the mastermind himself, could stop her. The vehicle sped toward the horizon, carrying 200 lives, a pilot who had become a legend, and a story that would echo across the skies of America and beyond. And somewhere in the distance, the mastermind watched, calculating, furious, but unable to deny the truth. Phoenix had risen. The name was no longer just a call sign. It was a legacy.